And welcome. You are listening to a very live broadcast today. This is Three Women, and I'm your host, Sherry DeNovo, MPP Parkdale High Park. I have in the studio three women. We have Francine Dick from CanadianWomenMarch.ca. Francine, a Torontonian, participant in the Heart to Heart program of Camp Shimria, hosting Israeli, Arab, and Jewish teenagers on their visits to Toronto, awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for her volunteer service. We have Christina Peltier, expat from Detroit, and recently from Detroit, going to talk about the impact of Trump down there and up here. And she's an urban planner, master's from McGill, and works here as an urban planner at KFA Architects and Planners. And we have Kavita Dogra, who is from We Talk Women. Again, born in New Brunswick, spent a number of years in her childhood in India, and worked with her mother there on HIV/AIDS awareness and skills training, and brought that activism back to Canada in terms of We Talk Women, that works to raise awareness about girls and women's rights issues. We're going to talk about Trump. What else? But the impact of Trump on, and the Trump phenomena, if we can call it that, on Canada and on women in particular, and what's leading up to what we hope is a huge rally in Toronto at the time of the inauguration in sisterhood with the Million Women March in Washington. So welcome all to Three Women.
Thank you.
Francine, let's start with you. You've been an activist for a long time now, and I've talked on the radio show before about what seems to be the Pandora's box being opened by the Trump phenomena in terms of racism, misogyny, homophobia, you name it, climate change denial. What have you experienced?
Well, I think it's almost like a repeat cycle or deja vu. So 40 years ago, when I graduated from photography school, I tried to find work in one of the many large commercial studios that were in Toronto at that time. And I was greeted, I think at best with amusement and at worst with derision. And I remember one man saying to me, well, what would you do if you had to move a piece of heavy furniture? And I replied, I'd do the same thing a man would do, ask someone to help me. I remember another man who said he wouldn't be able to work with a woman. He just couldn't work with a woman. And what was interesting, so I never did get a job there. What was interesting, my boyfriend, who graduated in the same class as I, did find work in one of the big commercial studios. And at the same time, like many young women, I was working as a server to pay my tuition. And I was pinched and I was grabbed. And of course, I never said anything about it. Also at that time, a friend of mine, so this must have been 1971, 72, a friend of mine wanted to get an abortion. She had an unwanted pregnancy. And at that time, you had to go before a panel of doctors and plead your case. She had to do that, and her older sister coached her and told her she should tell the doctors if she didn't get the abortion, she would kill herself. So I like to think that 40 years on, things have improved and changed, and they have in a way, and they have not in a way. Women are still denied positions of power. No one says to your face anymore, well, we don't want a woman sitting on our men's club boardroom table, but they're still denied those positions. And certainly what we saw in the election that just happened with the misogyny against Hillary Clinton, not wanting women in positions of power certainly exists. Women are still pinched and grabbed, and I look at the threat to women's fundamental right of control over their own bodies. And that's really scary.
Especially when you think about what might happen to organizations like Planned Parenthood, which quite frankly provide health care to women who can't afford it in the States, basic health care.
Absolutely. And I mean, you have a vice president who is fundamentally anti choice. This is a man who wanted to have funerals for fetuses. I mean, it's just bizarre. And so you're right. I've been an activist for a long, long time, and I'll probably have to be one until the day I die because we make these gains and people want to take them away from us.
Christina, you're an American. You just came back from Detroit. What's the mood down there? And are you feeling, thank God I'm in Canada?
There's definitely a lot of fear. Detroit's 85% African American, large Arabic population. More so a lot of solidarity when I went back home. I went to the Schwitz Health Club, which does a monthly brunch, and in solidarity with a lot of women, talked about how we saw our future. After that, I was at an event where people were making packages for at-risk LGBT youth. A lot of my friends are making donations to Planned Parenthood. Recycle here in Detroit drove 2 truckloads of cords of wood out to North Dakota as their way of countering some of the environmental concerns, and people donated to Recycle here. But Detroit's always had a strong activist community, and definitely a lot of solidarity, but of course a lot of fear.
And has that level of activism increased since the Trump election?
It's definitely been increasing consistently as he got more power. We've had a few protests in the city since the election, both peaceful, 2 that I know of that were peaceful. I definitely would say it's increasing.
And what about you, Kavita? What have you noticed just personally since this election?
Well, post-election, I think a lot of us were shocked, sad, and then, after a few days, once you get out of your state of sadness, you decide that you want to do something. And although Trump is not our, prime minister, and thankfully, people here still wanted to be active and show support for the people that were organizing in the States. And this is kind of how the women's rally came about. I can't go to Washington. And the idea is that people here that are feeling like they want to support people south of the border, but also remind our politicians that there is no space for hate politics here, and that we are a country about inclusivity and love. And post Trump's election, there has been an increase of racist acts and people feeling empowered and emboldened to, say things and spread hate that we want to squash down with love at the rally. And, like I said, just we're marching in solidarity with the women south of the border because we support them. We want to send the message that we see you, we hear you, we're not okay with any reversal of rights. As you mentioned, access to reproductive care in Ohio recently, but also all over the states, there have been multiple bills that have been passed or they're trying to pass to kind of take away access to abortion. And it's 2016. I don't know what's going on.
Sorry, go ahead, Francine.
No, I think what Kavita said is very true, that I think for a lot of us, I know for about 4 days after the election, I couldn't sleep. And everyone was so depressed about it. But I think now what's happened, the reality has sunk in, but now we're feeling the activists want to do something. So we are, and this march in Washington just sprang up very organically, and now it's spread. So there's solidarity marches, well, I'm sure all over the United States, and there will be all over the world. We've got.
Yeah, so let's say we're going to mention this many times throughout this hour, but Kavita, when is this march? Where is it going to be? And I know your organizations are kind of coalescing now. Will there be a Facebook invite page, et cetera, et cetera?
So there is currently a Facebook event page where people can go. We have secured our location as of today, like a few hours ago. Yay! So we will start at Queen's Park, and that will be changed on the Facebook page as soon as I'm done this interview.
And what is the Facebook page called?
It's called Women's March on Washington, Toronto. So just to kind of keep in with the look and feel of the Women's March on Washington. and it'll be on January 21st, so the day after inauguration, same day as the one in Washington.
And 2:00 in the afternoon, do we know?
It'll be 12 to 2.
12 to 2. Okay, so we'll repeat that many times because we want to build up as many people as possible. Only women? Can male supporters come?
No, everybody is invited.
There you go.
Everybody is invited.
Women and those who love women, come on out. Back to Francine's point about and all of your point about the increase in everything objectionable, misogyny, homophobia, racism, climate change denial, all have been unleashed. And I said before on this program that at the last anti-Trump rally in Toronto that got about 1,000 people out in the pouring rain, it was terrible, cold, nasty weather. And I was clipped saying something like, we're all Muslim now, which is the Michael Moore thing. You know, we're supportive of Muslims because Islamophobia is definitely on the rise. And for the next couple of days, my staff and I spent a lot of our time deleting and blocking the most racist, misogynist, Islamophobic comments you'd ever want to hear. So the counter demonstration was not there, although it may be, but it was in the one coming up, but it was certainly online. What are we going to do about this anticipation? And by the way, before we start talking about that, we are live, so you are welcome to add your voice to the conversation. 416-946-7000. We're talking about the impact on women in particular on the Trump election. And you can also tweet me at CHERIDINOVO, Sherry DeNovo, and if you're the shy sort, and I will introduce your comment myself. Kavita, you were going to talk about the backlash.
So just to be clear, for the rally that we're holding in Toronto, it's not an anti-Trump rally. That's not how we're going forward with it. It's in solidarity with the women. There's enough anti out there.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be squashing that down with some love, peace, solidarity action. So it will be, although it is in solidarity with the women in Washington, like I said, it's an opportunity for us to remind our politicians, who have also said some interesting things over the last few weeks and months since Trump came in, that, you know, we're about being inclusive and we like all people, and, you know, we will not tolerate Islamophobia or hate or homophobia or misogyny for that matter. So the rally is kind of twofold. It's definitely with the women in Washington, but it's also, you know, at home, let's take this opportunity to not have Trump-like politics present here.
Absolutely.
And I think just to add to what Kavita said, it really is a celebration. And I think when we look at what we have accomplished, if you go back and the rights that we have achieved for women, for people of color, for different faiths, for LBG community, that we have achieved a lot. And that's the essence of a democracy. And those things really are threatened. And we want to celebrate our diversity. We want to celebrate that this is a country and a community that is open to everyone. We are all welcome. The protests, I mean, I guess if people show up, they show up. I don't know what will happen. Again, it's not an anti-Trump rally. It's a peaceful solidarity rally. There will always be things online. That's where people love to hide out because it's anonymous. It's a great place for cowards. And, you know, again...
Also, in our event page, it says quite clearly that violent behavior or hate speech will not be tolerated. So we're not, although we're promoting the event as an inclusive and safe space, we want people there to be peaceful and be joining in solidarity, not, although we can't control who shows up, so there may be Trump supporters or people that are against us, regardless, our reaction to it is not going to be violent. So
I think you'll find, like as we did in the last event, that it was mainly and mostly online. There weren't people there, and you'll see this on Facebook. If you go to Facebook event, if they're, you can always delete them and block them. They make themselves known. There's that good thing, but it really is surprising when it happens, and a little disturbing, not more than a little disturbing. So, Christina, you're in Canada. Do you hear from your American friends that they want to move here? Apparently, the computer crashed when he was elected in terms of people wanting to emigrate to Canada.
There was a lot of talk, especially after the election, people being extremely scared and surprised. But it's more of an attitude of, okay, we need to stay home. We need to fight this. We need to try to fix this. More that than people trying to move to Canada that I've talked to.
I mean, it's not the most realistic option. It
No,
does take
no.
time. And it just must be. I was in Chicago myself this last week for a few days. I sit on a committee for energy. So I tootled around. I was the only person, sort of left-leaning person on the committee. The rest were MLAs who are conservatives or Republican Americans. And we went to Enbridge, to a pipeline company, to a nuclear plant, to a solar and wind organization. So as you can imagine, it was very interesting. I was kind of the token other there. And I said it was, pipelines, nuclear, wind. It was kind of like past, present, future in terms of the energy industry, but that's not the way they saw it. I think they probably saw it as a reverse, and now we've got the announcement that Tillerson, who used to be head of ExxonMobil, is now the Secretary of State pick by Trump. So you know that certainly in that it's going back. But one of the women who did the organizing, who works for the Council of State Governance, kind of took me aside, and when she could be herself, she's a Democrat, and she was just horrified by what had happened. And she was really visibly disturbed and didn't know, which way to turn, really, how to move forward as a Democrat. And you can kind of see this working its way out in American politics. Did you see, just on the partisan, did you talk to Democrats? I mean, what's the mood in the Democratic Party down there, Christina?
Kind of what you described of how can we organize, what can we do to prevent as much destruction as possible. To what Obama's already done, that's been wonderful, and supportive of environmental issues, protecting natural resources. Concerned again of what's going to happen over in North Dakota with the pipeline there after we finally got some progress after protests. But again, still solidarity, confusion, and trying to find out what the next steps are.
And it's a good question. What is going to happen there in North Dakota? Because there was that step forward, and are we going to take 2 steps? I mean, it's a lot of people there now.
Yeah.
There's at least 1,000 people camped out there, and
in very harsh conditions.
In very harsh conditions, holding it down there. So it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good for January for
And
that
even
community.
Small things environmentally in Michigan. They're trying to store more nuclear waste in the city of Detroit that already faces a lot of environmental racism. Nestle's trying to pump more water out of the Great Lakes from both countries. And if this is happening pre-Trump, what's going to happen post-Trump?
And how's Detroit these days? What's happening there?
A lot of progress, and I think we can thank Obama for that, and a lot of amazing community leaders. The federal government's been very supportive as far as giving demolition funds for houses that should have been torn down decades ago. And it's amazing what that does for a community when you've taken out a venue where a drug dealer could post up, or hazards to your children, or a fire potential. And Detroit's also a sanctuary city. They're providing ID to people who can't typically get ID in the city. Just came out in the newspaper recently that it's going through. And Trump has said he's not going to be very friendly with sanctuary cities like Detroit. So hopefully we don't lose the progress we've already made to help start turning the city around. It took 50 years of poor federal policies to put it in the current state, and it's sensitive. And hopefully it doesn't go backwards.
Because the stories we were hearing up in Canada about Detroit were, sort of urban farming, because you couldn't build houses you could buy for a couple of bucks, and just kind of, no services to 911 kind of thing. So that's good.
But I've heard, just we're getting off topic
Sure.
here, but I have to give a shout out to Detroit because I've heard wonderful things about it. And they actually have tours from Toronto that go to Detroit because it is a real sense of urban renewal. That, again, people are taking the initiative and are rebuilding the city. And I think that's that forward looking that we may lose, that the auto industry maybe has seen its glory days, and those days are gone, but people are sort of looking forward and doing renewal, and that's just another small thing that may get lost.
And small industries actually, in some ways, coming back to the city. A gentleman from Calgary started Detroit Bikes, and they're actually building bikes fully in the city. And hopefully that doesn't backtrack.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you're an urban planner, so it must be kind of a case study in progress.
I have friends with the Detroit Planning Commission who helped write the urban agriculture ordinance, and they made sure it stayed community-based. They didn't want corporations coming in because agricultural waste has a lot of toxicity to it. And they've been very thoughtful in what they've been trying to do as far as planning the city in a way that's healthy for the residents. And again, that could backtrack, but it is an interesting time to see what's happening.
And Kavita, with your background, again, social justice activist, what inspired you to look at this women's gathering on the 21st, rather than something else you might be doing?
Like I said, I think after the election, once we were all done crying into our pillow, it was, what can I do? What can I do here that would have some sort of impact? As somebody who cares about human rights, whether they're here in my own backyard or around the world, as Human Rights Watch, their tagline is "Tyranny has a witness." It's, you sit here and think, I'm going to watch this as it unfolds, and I don't want to be silent and in watching a reversal of gains that have been made, not only under Obama's administration, but over the years. And Trump definitely has that rhetoric. And who knows what's actually going to happen once he's in that seat, but it's not looking good so far. So it was, what can I do here? And I think solidarity marches were already starting to pop up outside of Washington because it wasn't realistic for everybody to go to Washington. And Toronto's a major city, and so I said, hey, why not? And the day, in fact, that I was meeting up with a friend to talk about how can we do something here, what should we do, we discovered this Facebook page that already had a few women organizing, and then they said, hey, can you take this over? We don't know. We don't have any experience doing this. So although We Talk Women is the official host on Facebook, there's a whole committee of people helping organize this thing, because we do hope that hundreds of people come out, as many as can, and that takes a lot of planning and experience with logistics of where and how. And
I think you'll find you get lots of help on that.
Yeah, I hope so.
And now your social justice roots are really in India, so there's an interesting, we've talked about the municipal effects of this in Detroit, the international effects of this new administration. And what do you
It's
see
funny, we
happening
had
there?
family from India send us links and what's going on over there. And it's like, well, thankfully it's not happening in Canada.
Yeah.
But I was a child when I was in India, so I spent my formative years there from 3 to 11. So wasn't really an activist there. I was just following my mom around as she did.
Who was an activist.
Who was doing meaningful work in the community. And so she really kind of planted that seed in me, and it kind of grew as I came here. But the impact is worldwide. I mean, he's in charge of the most powerful country in the world, and denying things like climate change. Climate change is already having a detrimental impact on so many communities around the world. India is a country where there's also climate change impact. And so the impact of Trump will be seen by the whole world, and it's our job, I guess, on the ground to make it as difficult for him as possible to go back on any of the gains that we've made.
I heard that, I think was it last summer, that there was a record high of 50 degrees or something registered in New Delhi. It was I think it was an Indian city, I think it was New Delhi, but 50 degrees, that this was the record that they
Yeah,
had seen.
and
So
that's-
now this is, the new normal.
And
Well,
that's the sad part is that every year there's a new record. There's a new record high. Even in Toronto, we, our summers or our winters, but we're not sure if it's real. So
Well, and I think also, yes, you can have a really warm winter occasionally or a hot summer, but when you have islands that are being flooded now and people have to leave, when you have chunks of icebergs in the Antarctic that are breaking off, when you have the polar bears starving to death in the Arctic because there's no ice for them. Those are real things.
And extreme weather in
Yeah.
states now, they're already budgeting in many states, because I'm in those circles to where they used to have an extreme weather something every decade. Now they're looking at almost annually something happening.
When you talk, sorry.
So go ahead, Christina.
When you talk about all the produce being grown in California, and they've had a 6-year drought, and a lot of that produce is also coming to Canada, there's some serious effects.
Well, we're going to take a little bit of a station break, and we're going to come back and talk with Kavita Dogra, Christina Pelletier, and Francine Dick, panel of phenomenal women activists, not only about the Women's March coming up, but why we need it. Back at you on Three Women in just a moment.
Freedom and blood, I make my mark and fight for tomorrow. Finally I've got something I can raise my voice for. Fire, tell me who you really want. Fire, well, you'll get yours and I'll get mine. They say proud, I'm proud to be, proud to see. They say proud, I'm proud to be me. They say tell me, well, you got to tell me. Wow, freedom's rough, so we take our stand and fight for tomorrow. Finally we got something we can bring down the house with. Fire, tell them who you think you are. Fire, well, tell them fine is what you are. You say proud, I'm proud to be, proud to see. They say proud, I'm proud to be me. They say tell me, well, you got to tell me. And when you finally figure out what it is you need, you better think of me. Think of me. No, 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 no. Rhythm in my fingers, I get up. I hear the rhythm in my laughter. Take a second look. You might find that I am stronger. Take a second look. You might find that you are stronger. Imagination, inspiration, it's only fair that I tell you I plan on leaving here tonight with my pride. With my pride, gets me every time. With my pride, I'm proud to be, I'm proud to be. With my pride, proud to be, I'm proud to be me.
Right here, right now, every day. CIUT 89.5, Toronto. The sound of your city.
And we are back on Three Women. That was Tegan and Sarah, if you didn't already know. Thank you for regaling us. And I also want to give a shout out before I forget to Lisa and Aaron, who are our fabulous techs who hold it down on the other side of the glass. We have in the studio Kavita Dogra, We Talk Women. We've got Christina Peltier, who's an urban planner from Detroit originally, talking about the effects there and her friends in the States because she just came back from there. Francine Dick, CanadianWomenMarch.ca, again, an activist of many, many years around women's rights and other rights. But we were just chatting, of course, as the music was playing, about the role of social media and the role of media. And I was saying that I think part of the problem that led up to the results of the election south of the border is that a lot of people get their news from online and social media, and you forget when you do that that's being sorted for you and you're hearing from like minds. And where we might think, and we did, I think a lot of us were so shocked by the results of the election because everybody we heard from online or on our Facebook pages were all thinking the same way we were. But we didn't realize that the right wing also had that result, that they were also in a bubble with people who fed them information, and that they were trudging right along, and that nobody really cared much about the facts anymore. Kavita, you were talking about Google.
Yeah, so, Google kind of is the first place everybody goes. Let's Google that. Google's turned into a verb. And it finishes your sentences for you. So, our world is shaped by the search results. And so speaking of social media, at times people forget that the link to the news article isn't actually going to a real news outlet. It's going to a blog, or it's going to some made-up website, or, it's not real. And so there's been this huge, now there's been a lot of talk about fake news and how it had an impact on the election, but I think there's a lot of that out there, and unfortunately, the internet's great, but unfortunately there's a lot of space for error. And the problem is most of us do get our news from social media, which is great, but there's too much room for the fake news, for things to go wrong, and for people to attack you. So it's a space where I think, like you said, people were in a bubble. We surround ourselves with like-minded people in our real lives, but also online. I follow like-minded organizations and like-minded journalists, and so my world is shaped by that. But it is important, especially now, to break out of our silos and break out of our bubbles and listen to what the other side is saying. Even if we're offended by it, let's hear where they're coming from, because otherwise we're never going to move forward. We can't just hate people that are the opposite of us.
And Christina, you were talking about some of your family were Trump supporters. So what was that like going back to Detroit?
Talking with the family members, they repeated a lot of the dogmatic phrases you heard about Hillary from the right. Some of them primarily get their news from Fox News or from Facebook. They might have the best intentions, but when you try to counter them and say, well, what about this news source, or where are you getting that from that you're sharing on Facebook, they become very frustrated and apathetic. Well, I can't trust the news. The U.S. news media isn't trustworthy, and just frustration. So that's kind of the feeling in that direction.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's interesting, too, is Michael Moore, who's hardly known for his right-wing tendencies, did predict that Trump would win back in the summer. And one of his points was that progressive people were not listening to the people in the swing states, in Ohio, Pennsylvania, the people who were unemployed or underemployed, people who were hurting. And, we just turned them off. And there was a real frustration with them. And, we kind of look and say, well, why would you vote for a man who's so establishment? And certainly his choices are proving that. But it was just, I think, for a lot of people, a way of lashing out and a way of getting back at what they perceived as the establishment. So I think what Kavita said is right. We tend to, we'll look at the journalists that we like that tend to reflect our progressive views, and we don't see the other side. So I think most of us were really caught off guard by the election of Trump. And
Absolutely, it was shocking to most folk, because especially to some pollsters even who had predicted that Hillary was about 10 points ahead, and then it kind of dwindled and dwindled. This has been one of the concerns about environmentalists, but you could also say it's a concern for feminists, is that we haven't done a very good job, maybe, of speaking across those boundaries to folk who are hurting and don't get it, and think their jobs or their livelihoods are on the line, and many of them are, and they're living precariously. A lot of the Americans and a lot of Canadians are working at precarious, temporary contract kind of jobs. They're scared. They're worried about how they're going to pay their mortgages or their rents, how they're going to feed their children, and those are their primary concerns. And quite frankly, the fact that a pipeline might go in or out, or that's way off in the distance to them. It's like getting food on the table. And it's the same with feminism, equal rights. Well, I just want a job. I really, any job will do. Have we done a poor job at communicating what we see as sort of the new normal, what we see as everybody should understand that women need equality still. Everybody should understand that we need a clean planet. What should we do differently? Anybody? Kavita?
I think the thing, too, is that a lot of those people didn't vote. In the States, the people that were feeling like you're not listening to me and you don't care about the things that I'm facing, a lot of those people didn't come out to vote. So it's not necessarily that they all turned around and voted for Trump. Voter turnout is what it is, and a lot of people don't vote. And what I learned this election is that it's, in fact, very hard to vote in the States. Depending on where you live, you have to drive far away or stand in line for hours. I take it for granted in Canada I can go down in my hallway in my apartment building and vote there and
or
call
take
it
a day off work.
Or take a day off work
pay.
or time off work. So it's a lot easier here. I didn't realize that it was a bit of a process over there. So they weren't inspired to vote. But yes, I think, at times we don't do a very good job of listening to the other side and the other side of whatever it is that we stand for. I think the only way to understand and to move forward and make gains is to have open dialogue. And feminists get accused of this all the time, of not listening, and I don't think that's necessarily fair, but again, I'm biased. I follow like-minded people, so I've only ever followed feminists that were open to discussion and in fact encouraged it. But I think it's easier and sometimes safer to live in your own bubble, and you feel more hopeful when you live in your own bubble and have like-minded opinions around you.
So, Christina, you're an American. You spoke to Americans, some of them Trump supporters. What do you say to them? I mean, how do you get through at that level?
Like one of my cousins put it well. He works in a factory in Detroit. He has 3 children. He just bought a house. It took about 9 months to go through the process. I don't know if he went out and voted. He said he didn't for Trump, but he said the reason people voted for Trump was that exact frustration of both political parties aren't listening to us. This man says he's going to do different. It was a way of saying get lost to the existing
throw
infrastructure.
the bums out.
Not looking at the consequences necessarily. And it's hard to get through. My cousin's perspective, he lives in a very segregated area. And when you cross the border of 8 Mile in Detroit, it flip-flops between African-American and white pretty dramatically in population shift. And he's hearing constantly on social media, he's a sexist, he's a racist, he's, whatever terms go out. And he immediately shuts down. And it took some time for him and I to have a discussion. I'm considered liberal. I went to university. Just different stereotypes that have gone across economic lines just in families. And a lot of my friends have lost family members over this. I asked one relative not to post racist YouTube videos on my Facebook page, or I was going to have to unfriend him. We could talk privately about some of his concerns. And instead, he just took me off his page. And this is a cousin who's slightly older than me. He's got 3 daughters of his own and went to university and very solid Trump supporter. And whenever I would try to have debates with him, it was very dogmatic responses. And again, his only news source is Fox News. And I think that's where U.S. media has a serious problem. I think it's either Detroit Free Press or Detroit News right now is doing buyouts. And there's been a huge dismantling of the media in the U.S.
And here too. I mean, talk to a journalist who has a job, and that's a rare person. Really, I mean, most news sources are cutting back and slashing staff and much more beholden to advertisers than ever before because of all of that. It's a problem with mainstream news, and it's a problem with them just giving a lot of airtime to the right wing. By the way, you're listening to Three Women, and we are here at CIUT 89.5 FM, the only place we could be, the only alternative radio station left in Toronto. You can phone in too if you want to be part of the conversation at 416-946-7000. You can tweet me at Sherry DiNovo, CHERIDINOVO, and let me know what you're thinking as well. But I give an example just recently at Queen's Park. We passed a parent equality bill so that LGBTQ parents don't have to adopt their own children anymore. I worked on it for many years. Courts said the government had to act. They finally did. It was a big celebration for a lot of people. And the headline was about a young 19-year-old conservative who got elected who's homophobic and didn't vote for the bill. His picture was the picture. His opinions were the story. And there you go. I mean, it sells papers because, people want to read about this stuff. But what I think the media doesn't get is that it also gives them airtime. And airtime's invaluable. And that's what happened with Trump. I mean, when Bernie Sanders was running, he got very little press. Trump got tons of it because of the outrageous things he said. And, and again, that just kept going because it helped sell.
Well, and I think that's true. I know there's about 16 people running for the Conservative leadership. I think I'm pretty tuned in, but I couldn't name half of them. But the ones who get most pressed, of course, is Kelly Leitch and recently Chris Alexander because of the outrageous things they say. And that's the attention that they get. And when we going into that, when we look at that, I don't think we can be too complacent in Canada because no one thought Trump would win the leadership, first of all, or the nomination. And then no one thought he could be president, and he is, or he's president-elect. And people were shocked by it. So these things can happen. I like to think it won't in Canada, but I don't think we can be complacent. And I think when I listen here, and I think there is a divide, and I think a lot of it, and maybe I'm just being airy-fairy, but I think a lot is people not talking to each other. And a lot of people, so someone who might be very Islamophobic, maybe they've never met a Muslim, and so if you could somehow get people together to talk to each other, which people have been doing in small groups for decades, just to meet people and understand them and, how...
You'll see that with the major cities in the U.S. Most of them went towards Hillary. It was the more rural areas. And in major centers, you're having that interaction that they're not having. So,
mm-hmm. And also, I think there is a kind of a myth that's been pointed out about the Trump supporter as being this sort of redneck, Rust Belt white guy. Mm-hmm. But I mean, the reality is a lot of his supporters made a lot of money too, and were educated. So there is
and
a class divide.
Women.
Yeah. I mean, and 24% of Latinos voted for Trump, which is hard to believe when you're going to build a wall. But I mean, this is, and women, despite the fact that he's been assaulting women, we don't care. Let's talk about that. We've got somebody who's been accused of assault by a number of women in the White House now. What does this mean about violence against women? Anybody?
It's just not the type of leader that you hope for the most powerful country in the world. You expect someone to set an example, and his attitude is what you find on a troll on Twitter. Like he's so standoffish and not open to those conversations. And I think, as you said, Francine, in Canada, we can't be complacent, not only on a governmental level, but, the environment, like I said, in the States, but also here, people that people that would have supported Trump if they lived there, they feel emboldened because now he's in power. They feel like, oh, it's okay to say the racist or sexist thing that I want to say. And it's like, no, it's not. And so that's part of the rally. Like, the idea is that, no, there is no place for that here. Please keep that attitude to yourself.
We had Brian Mulroney come out and say, oh, give the guy a chance. He's my neighbor. We live next to each other in Palm Beach. And I thought, oh, the Mulroney years. I remember there was that book written on the take, greed, corruption, and the Mulroney years. So I guess it takes one to know one. But I mean, there you have a Canadian, a prime minister, ex-prime minister, signaling support. Give the guy a chance. Never know what it's all going to work out. All this fear and hysteria. Don't worry about it.
And I think it's more important. I mean, this thing, other people have been saying, oh, give him a chance, give him a chance. Okay, we accept the fact he's president-elect. That's the way democracy works. But I don't think we can just sit back and say, okay, go ahead. I mean, he's not even the president yet. And look at the choices that he's made. It's crazy. So I don't think we can just say, oh, yeah, well, let's just see how that plays out here. We have to show our opposition to what he's doing. We have to let him know that we're not happy with those things. And that's our right. That's our democratic right. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like any criticism. We know that. He's like, a little grade 3 bully. His skin is so thin. Does not take any sort of criticism, and that's too bad. You're the president. We have free speech, and we need to show that there are people who, yes, we do believe in climate change. We do believe that people should have equal rights, that America should be open to all people, as it was for your ancestors and all our ancestors who came here from somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And I think the women aspect is really important too. I mean,
absolutely.
Whatever one thought about Hillary, this could have been the first woman president. And this was a woman who the attacks on her, the racist attacks and misogynist attacks were
horrible,
unbelievable. And it was because she was a woman. I mean, this is why she was attacked in part. So.
And it's kind of funny, actually, because then, and if you say that, then people attack you for saying that, oh, no, we're attacking her because of her politics, not because she's a woman, but because she's a bad politician. It's like, well, have you heard Trump talk? So what's the comparison here? A politician who's had a career for longer than you've been born, and you're yelling at me about Trump. It's... As soon as you said anything about Hillary lost or, Hillary didn't do well or Hillary experienced misogyny, people get really violent towards you and claim that it was because of her politics, which may be true. You may not have agreed with her politics, and that's a valid point. But
most can't actually tell you their politics when you actually call them out on it. So no, what it comes down to is she became a symbol for people to hate who were frustrated. And as Canadians, what you can do to counter the Trump effect is protect your affordable health care, protect your education system. Universities become so expensive in the United States. I went to McGill for reasons. It was still cheaper for me to leave my own country to come to Canada. And the middle class has lost so much as far as their cost of living increasing, the benefits they've seen, education costs skyrocketing, and they're not seeing the big picture of how past policies and often Republican policies set these in motion. This is how Canada can more so say we're not going to go the same direction. I did talk to 3 young activists from Soviet Union, very active during the last few years politically. I won't name the name of their group on air, but they said it happened quickly over there, going from Gorbachev over. And it could happen quickly
and now
anywhere.
We have a friend of Putin's in the White House,
and
and a rise of right wing politicians around the world.
And in our bubble world, a lot of us in the States didn't see this happening. I had friends calling me up until 10 p.m. at night, and no, only 50% of the votes in. There's no way. But even with the recounts in Michigan that were just stalled, they found, I think, 75,000 ballots. There was no president mentioned, which means there's definitely some issues just with our voting process in the States.
Well, the electoral college system is kind of strange in the Canadian, but you're so right, Christina. Thank you for raising that. I mean, it's, things like Medicare, when most Canadians say, what are you proudest about? Being a Canadian, and it's across party lines here. It's Medicare. When Obamacare came in the States, which is not quite a single payer system, it's not as good as ours, but still, the lies that were spread around about the Canadian medical system down there. So I was down there at conferences with conservatives, liberals, myself, and New Democrat. We were all down there at the same conferences. All we did was to become diplomats for Medicare. That's what we did. Just countered the lies. And Americans were astounded that conservatives supported Medicare. They didn't always, but they, of course, do now. It's impossible to be against it. Or public educational. You can chip away at the edges, and we are. But I mean, these are things that make us proud as Canadians. So we kind of took that down. But again, there is a classic case of unbelievable lies being spread about, they could have driven, 90 an hour or two north, and they could have found the truth out for themselves.
I'm constantly fighting the healthcare. Because of NAFTA, I have OHIP, and it's probably the best healthcare I've ever had. Constantly fighting that rumor or myths.
In the States, when you go back there, that it's, we have to wait for a year, our waiting lists are too long, don't get me wrong.
I waited 3 days, 3 days for a lung specialist. I probably would have waited even longer in the U.S. trying to get a referral.
Yeah,
So, and I didn't have health care for years in the U.S. while I was going to university. I would actually go across the border, pay cash at a Canadian clinic because it was still faster than waiting for 4 hours at a Detroit clinic and pay the same amount.
We touched on Planned Parenthood, and I want to maybe touch on that again because that's such a big issue. And for South of the border, that provides so much to women who can't afford it, otherwise, especially women. What do you think is going to happen there?
It's scary that I got my health care while I was in university from Planned Parenthood. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to get certain versions of health care. A lot of my friends have been making donations specifically for that. There's a huge miscommunication around what they do. And again, some of my conservative relatives, I'm constantly fighting back saying that abortion is just a small percentage of what happens there. It's not about that. But misinformation again, and it's almost like a us versus them attitude. And I've never found a way to convince conservatives the benefits of Planned Parenthood.
And I think that's fundamental, and I'm glad that you raised that, people think of Planned Parenthood and they think, all they do is provide abortion referrals, and they take care of women's health, breast cancer screening, cervical, pap smears, birth control. I mean, the whole gamut of health care for women. And, as Christina said, I mean, that is, a place where a lot of women get their health care, and where are they going to go now?
And even when it comes to right to choose, that's clearly going to be under attack.
Absolutely.
From this new administration. It has been under attack for a while.
It has been under attack for a while, and I don't think Trump's going to help the case, but I feel like there's been a reversal happening even under the Obama administration, and I guess I'm no expert on this, and what I take from it is that each state can have their own rules about access to abortion care. And the problem, too, is that even in Canada, although it's legal, access is a whole different issue. And this is the last event that I did through We Talk Women, was access to abortion care in Canada. It's not as easy as you think it is or assume that it is, especially if you live in a rural community. Even if you live in Toronto, if you live in Ottawa, you can wait up to 10 weeks before you find a doctor because the doctor has to agree. You have to go to the right hospital. Although it's legal, access is still an issue, and that's something that even in the eastern provinces, women have to drive hours and hours, sometimes to a different province, to actually have the services done. So, and Planned Parenthood Toronto actually was one of my speakers, and they don't even provide abortions. So there's a lot of misinformation about what Planned Parenthood does in the States, but everywhere that they have an office.
It really is just an attack on women.
And we have to cure it as that. Sometimes we like to slough it off and think, oh, it's not that. Because, I mean, these are absolutely patriarchal, misogynist attacks on women. I think, Francine, to go back to where we started, when you were talking about 40 years ago in your activism, I think of those critical issues for women. Childcare, we used to fight for free, universal childcare, your right to choose, control over your own body, and equal pay for equal work. And all of those things we still don't have in Ontario. We really don't have them. I mean, childcare is the most expensive in Canada. For a lot of women, it's not worth going to work because it's so expensive. Right to choose, we're still fighting that battle, as you said, Kavita, even though it's access, it's access now rather than legality. And equal pay for equal work, we still make like 73 cents to every dollar men make. So, I mean, we're still fighting those, and this isn't going to help. So important. We just have a few minutes left. And Francine, I wanted to start with you. CanadianWomenMarch.ca, what's that about?
So CanadianWomenMarch.ca, and we're also on Facebook, WMW Canada, Twitter account, Instagram. So it started, again, as an offshoot of the Washington group. They are organizing buses. If you go to the webpage and you do want to go down to Washington, they do have buses and they're arranging hotels. Of course, they're trying to fundraise to cover costs for women who can't, but there is a cost to that. But it's also, we decided again to hold a solidarity rally. I guess I could have gone to Washington, but I want to stay here because I think it's really important that we show throughout the world solidarity with our American sisters and brothers, and also to support what we have here. And so I hope on January 21st, looks like it might be at Queen's Park, stay tuned, everyone will come out. Do you know what time? Is there a time yet?
12 to 2.
Between 12 to 2, yeah.
12 to 2, come out, bring your family, bring your friends. Everybody is welcome. And I think there'll be great speeches, but it's also a celebration of what we have and what we want to keep that makes our lives so good.
Yeah, what we've gained and how far we have to go, and don't stop us now. And Kavita, let's get again, it's Queen's Park, the 21st, 12 to 2, and the Facebook page is
Women's March on Washington, Toronto. So if you start doing a little search on Facebook, you'll find it, or you can follow We Talk Women. I've tweeted out the link, and actually we have a committee meeting after this interview, but we will also be gathering information about all the different marches that will be happening in Canada and in the States on my website, wetalkwomen.org. So please do come out in Toronto. Again, it's not an anti-Trump rally. It's a rally of just in solidarity and for people in Canada to keep what we have.
and to march with the women that are marching in Washington.
And
Christina, are you going to be here